Hello, my name is Emma Christine, a 44-year-old housewife who found herself navigating a tumultuous chapter after 32 years of marriage to my husband, Larry. Our relationship, characterized more by routine than companionship and marked by the absence of children, had slowly unraveled. Mutual support and affection had faded over time, leaving me feeling increasingly isolated despite my initial belief in our partnership. One day, after filing for divorce and amid the painful process of dividing our assets, I made the difficult decision to claim the house. Larry, however, didn't contest my choice. Without a word, he abruptly left my hospital room, where I was battling cancer. His indifference to my pleas for him to stay or even engage in a meaningful conversation underscored the deep rift between us. Feeling abandoned during such a vulnerable time, I was engulfed by loneliness. Yet as I faced my illness, the resentment and pain that had lingered in my heart began to dissipate. My love for Larry seemed to evaporate, replaced by a stark awareness of his selfishness and lack of support. Realizing that he deserved some form of retribution for his actions, I began to quietly plot my revenge. Over the years, I had endured his demands and indifference, even as my health declined. Larry expected me to fulfill my duties as a housewife, prioritizing his leisure while never offering a helping hand. This disregard became even more apparent as I sensed a distinct change in my health that felt unlike anything I had experienced before. My story of a marriage devoid of joy and empathy highlights my growing awareness and determination to seek justice for myself. Despite my initial dreams of a supportive partnership, the reality had proven quite the opposite. Larry often insisted that I had no reason to complain about my role. This realization, along with my decision to address my situation, marked a poignant turning point in my life. I immediately reached out to my father, who accompanied me to the hospital after my cancer diagnosis. Thankfully, it was caught early and the doctor was optimistic, encouraging me to start treatment right away. Eager to confront the illness head-on, I asked my father to pack only the essentials from home while I quickly navigated the hospital admission process. Unable to see Larry that day due to his work commitments, I sent him a brief message informing him of my diagnosis and that I was being hospitalized for immediate treatment. As I grappled with the anxiety of an uncertain future, thoughts of Larry inevitably crept into my mind. Even though my feelings for him had diminished, a faint hope lingered that we could face this challenge together and perhaps rekindle some semblance of our former life as a couple. I envisioned a scenario where, moved by my vulnerability, Larry might express concern and ask, "Are you okay?" I yearned for even a few comforting words or a simple visit, which would have meant the world to me at that moment. I found myself wondering how Larry was managing at home, juggling meals and daily chores. A part of me felt guilty for not being able to maintain the household routines I had always managed with ease. However, as the days in the hospital stretched into weeks, Larry never came to see me. He had read my message, yet there was no sign of concern, not even a basic acknowledgement of my situation. His indifference, especially during such a serious illness, cut deeply and laid bare the stark reality of our relationship. Faced with this painful truth, I decided to release any expectations I had of Larry. With renewed focus, I prepared myself for the difficult journey ahead in my fight against cancer. The treatment was intense and fraught with pain and discomfort. The harsh side effects of the medication led to many sleepless nights. During these trying times, I sometimes contemplated giving in, allowing my weakening body to succumb to the disease. Yet with each passing day, I found strength in my determination to face this battle head-on, resolved to overcome the odds stacked against me. Although this journey was laden with hardship, it slowly transformed my perspective, teaching me resilience and the importance of self-reliance in the face of adversity. Each time I felt overwhelmed by my illness, the encouraging words from my parents reassured me that I was doing well and that things would improve, giving me the strength to persevere. Then, on a day when I felt particularly weak, lying in bed and staring blankly at the ceiling, the door to my room swung open unexpectedly. It wasn't a scheduled visit day for my parents, and I was curious about who it could be. As I turned my head, the identity of my visitor became clear. It was Larry. I wondered if Larry had come out of genuine concern for my condition as he looked at my gaunt face and hollow cheeks. A whirlwind of emotions left me speechless. I feared that seeing me like this would only deepen his disdain. Without a hint of empathy, Larry settled into a chair beside my bed, stared at me, and laughed. "So, this is how bad one can look with cancer, huh?" You don't even look like a woman anymore." His words struck me like a punch, draining the color from my face. Such cruelty was completely inappropriate, especially for someone battling cancer. I wished he would stop talking, but Larry, oblivious to my feelings, pressed on with even more devastating comments. "Ever since you've been hospitalized and not home, every day has felt like heaven. The house is a mess, but I don't even have to go back there. Life is so comfortable without you." His merciless words reopened old wounds, leaving me bewildered at the complete absence of concern in his voice. I wanted to rebuke him sharply, but my weakened body held me back, leaving me to silently endure his harsh tirade. I stared at him with a vacant gaze, and noticing my expression, he laughed mockingly. Then, as if to add insult to injury, he casually mentioned, "Oh, by the way, I've already filed the divorce papers. I'll be taking the house, and as for the property division, you hardly have any right to refuse." My vision blurred, and the room seemed to spin around me. The emotional and physical toll of my illness, combined with Larry's heartless comments, felt overwhelming. Yet it was in that moment that my resolve began to crystallize. I was determined to recover and reclaim my life from the shadows of his cruelty. Larry had filed for divorce without even discussing it with me, leaving me in shock. As I grappled with the reality of his betrayal, he continued, "I've fallen for someone else. She's 21 years younger, but I'm serious about her. You're just in the way now." The painful realization of his affair flashed through my mind. But having said what he wanted, Larry turned to leave. "Wait a minute," I called after him. I managed to speak, but Larry paid me no mind. It was clear there was no love left for me in his heart. The realization stung deeply, yet in that moment, I experienced a strange sense of clarity. "I see," I said quietly, a laugh escaping my lips as he left the hospital room. After he walked out, I faced my treatment with renewed determination. Despite the emotional turmoil, I focused all my energy on recovering from cancer and regaining my health. Those next 3 days, though they might seem brief, stretched endlessly for me, riddled with sleepless nights. I found myself wondering if the divorce Larry mentioned was real or merely intended to unsettle me. The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I clung to a trump card I believed would completely rattle him when revealed. As expected, Larry began to call. Thinking it inappropriate to answer in the hospital, I ignored his persistent calls even when my phone was on silent. Finally, irritation got the better of me, and I texted him, "I'm in a hospital room, and it's inconvenient to have my phone ringing, so please don't call." After that, the calls stopped, but the texts began. "Please let me talk to you just once. I was wrong about everything. I'll apologize properly." His words felt more like a defensive strategy than genuine remorse. It seemed that Larry, realizing the gravity of his situation and the impact of his actions, had resorted to messaging after I didn't answer his calls. All his pleas felt driven by a sudden fear of consequences rather than a true change of heart. Larry's incessant messages pushed me to a breaking point. When he texted, "Why did you accept the divorce so easily? Can I come over now?" I felt at my limit. Facing him while battling my illness promised nothing but more pain, yet refusing him seemed likely to lead to an endless cycle of calls. Reluctantly, I found myself weighing my options. I replied, "Do as you like." My plan for retribution was about to unfold. Larry, who had unjustly divorced me without my consent, was about to face the consequences of his actions. I had eagerly anticipated the moment I could plunge him into deep despair. "What the hell is this all about?" Larry burst into the room, his voice loud and tinged with panic. To anyone else, his reaction might have seemed excessive, but given the circumstances, his agitation was understandable. I had kept a critical secret from him, and now the decisive moment had arrived. "I had no idea you had assets worth $155 million. Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his eyes wide as he placed my passbook on the desk, clearly displaying a balance of over $15 million. "I never mentioned it because you never asked," I responded calmly. "How could I imagine a housewife like you having so much money? If I had known, I wouldn't have divorced you," he continued, his tone shifting from surprise to regret. "That's not my problem. It's your fault for not asking and for divorcing me without proper discussion," I countered, shutting down his baseless excuses. Despite his domineering behavior and the unilateral decision to end our marriage, Larry's selfishness didn't waver upon discovering my assets. "Why didn't you tell me? I wouldn't have divorced you if I'd known," he repeated almost to himself. The truth was, I had built this fortune of over $15 million through savvy investments, a hobby I had taken up to occupy my mind. My parents had suggested I try investing. Our family life had been comfortable even on Larry's salary alone, but I yearned for something that would engage my intellect. Now, the revelation of this hidden wealth was poised to turn Larry's world upside down, highlighting the value he had overlooked in me for so many years. I had always wanted to contribute to our finances in some way, and my father, knowledgeable about investments, had eagerly taught me the ropes. When I first showed interest in investing under my father's guidance, I hoped to make even a small profit. I made my first investment 6 years ago and quickly improved, becoming capable of earning significant amounts through my ventures. Even my father was surprised by my success, often remarking, "I never expected you to grow this much." The profits I generated over those 6 years totaled the $15 million reflected in the passbook Larry had brought up. I had planned to share this news with him when the timing felt right, but then I was diagnosed with cancer, and he divorced me before I had a chance to explain. I never intended to keep this wealth a secret forever. Once I overcame my battle with cancer and returned to a normal life, I hoped to share the news of my $15 million with Larry, believing it could enhance our life together. However, Larry chose to selfishly end our marriage before I could reveal this financial secret. Now that we were essentially strangers, it felt strange to disclose this to him. Given our circumstances, it seemed increasingly likely that the entire $15 million belonged to me alone. As I recounted my story, Larry's face flushed red with frustration. "If I had known you had this much money, I wouldn't have divorced you. It's your fault for keeping it a secret. You should pay me $15 million in the property division to a ton for hiding it from your husband," he declared. Whether he was panicking over missing out on such a vast fortune or frustrated that he couldn't claim it, Larry began making unrealistic demands. Since we were already divorced, he had no legal claim to the money, yet he seemed unable to grasp that the $15 million was now out of his reach. I couldn't help but laugh at his absurdity, which only fueled his anger further. "What are you laughing at? Stop belittling me," he yelled. Larry had always disliked my attitude, but now he accused me of deceit for not disclosing my fortune earlier. "A wife's assets belong to her husband. You have to give me this $15 million, he insisted. "I never intended to keep this a secret forever. I was going to tell you, but you divorced me first," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. However, Larry dismissed my explanations as mere excuses, becoming more enraged with each word. His shouting overwhelmed me, especially since I was still recovering from my illness. Continuing this conversation felt feeble. Larry was intent on portraying me as the villain. "Enough is enough," I finally exclaimed. "You divorced me on your own. Remember who filed the divorce papers without consulting me? I always knew your behavior was terrible, but I never thought you could be so cruel." My heart was now not only burdened by my struggle against cancer, but also filled with resentment toward Larry. His loud shouting was too much for my weakened body to handle. More than that, I couldn't hold back my anger toward this selfish man sitting arrogantly beside my hospital bed, hurling accusations steeped in self-centeredness. "Do you know what I thought when I found out I had cancer?" I continued to hope that perhaps this would make him reflect. I thought maybe it would cause him to worry about me, to show kindness, and reconsider his feelings. But instead, he didn't even bother to visit me in the hospital. His lack of empathy and support during such a critical time in my life revealed more about his character than anything else could. It was clear that any feelings he once had for me were overshadowed by his selfish desires and misguided sense of entitlement. When Larry finally did show up, he bluntly stated that he had filed for divorce without my consent and intended to take the house. His audacity in criticizing me for having substantial assets was astounding. I had said it many times before. I never intended to keep my wealth a secret indefinitely. I had planned to find the right moment to share the news, but he had ruined that opportunity with his actions. I had never blamed Larry as much as I did now. In the past, I always forgave his selfish behavior, believing that as a couple, we should support each other. I never scolded or reprimanded him, enduring everything for his sake. I had loved Larry deeply, but now, all I felt was uncontrollable anger and disbelief toward a man who only spoke and acted selfishly. How could someone be so self-centered? What kind of upbringing fosters such a lack of empathy? Surely, a person who engages in an affair and divorces without consent lacks serious consideration for others. Stunned into silence, I realized it was futile to harbor any hope or doubt. Then Larry pleaded, "My girlfriend found out you have $15 million and says she'll divorce me if I don't get it. If I don't get this money, I'll be all alone. You still love me, right? Don't you want to help the person you used to love?" It was clear Larry's mistress knew about my $15 million fortune, likely because he had carelessly told her. From his story, it seemed his mistress was just as obsessed with money. Birds of a feather flock together, I suppose. No matter how much suffering he faced now, it had nothing to do with me anymore. "Please, I'll do anything. Just give me the $15 million. Larry continued to beg, but his pleas felt meaningless. My feelings for him had completely evaporated, replaced by a firm resolve to separate my life from his once and for all. Seeing Larry in such utter desperation was almost comical, and I couldn't help but laugh, though a wave of disappointment and misery soon followed. It dawned on me that he had never shown such desperation for anything that truly mattered to me. As we continued our conversation, my feelings for him cooled further. I realized that any more interaction with this man, who had become so distasteful to me, could not possibly lead to happiness. I felt foolish for ever hoping he would show up with kind words during my illness, yet he remained completely oblivious to my feelings. "Please, I'm begging you. Help me," he pleaded. I found I could no longer stand to hear his voice. "Please leave now," I said firmly. His desperate look and continued pleas were nothing more than noise to me, an unwelcome disturbance. I pressed the nurse call button, explained the situation, and asked for assistance in removing Larry from the room. A security guard arrived promptly and escorted him out forcibly. "Please listen to me. I need you," Larry shouted until he was out of earshot, but I no longer took any of his words to heart. Larry tried to visit many times afterward, but the nurses, aware of the situation, never allowed him near my room again. I later learned from a friend that unable to secure the $15 million, Larry had disappointed his mistress, and she quickly left him. Now he was alone. Meanwhile, I faced my cancer with steadfast determination and eventually celebrated my recovery and discharge from the hospital. The relief and newfound energy from overcoming such a daunting challenge were more precious than anything I could have imagined. Now, I am enjoying a peaceful and relaxed life, thoughtfully managing the wealth I accumulated through my investments, far removed from the turmoil of my past with Larry.